On November 27, 2020, in the quiet town of Absard, east of Tehran, an ordinary afternoon was shattered by a sudden barrage of gunfire. The victim was Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, Iran's most guarded nuclear scientist, whose name had long lingered in intelligence files across the world. His black Nissan sedan was torn apart by bullets, its windows shattered, its doors pierced with holes from precision fire. Bystanders froze in disbelief, some fleeing in terror, while others clutched their phones to capture the chaos unfolding before them. The official narrative, released only hours later, was astonishing. Fakhrizadeh, known as the father of Iran's nuclear program, had been killed not by a visible team of assassins, but by what authorities described as a satellite-controlled machine gun mounted on a pickup truck. It was an attack that sounded more like science fiction than reality, executed in broad daylight on a busy road. Witnesses spoke of explosions, automatic bursts, and a final silence that hung over the scene like a grim omen. News agencies around the globe erupted with breaking alerts. Tehran's state media declared it an act of terrorism. Within minutes, speculation spread. Was it Israel's Mossad, striking with its legendary precision? Was it the United States, exacting pressure at the twilight of the Trump administration? Or was it a coalition of intelligence services, united in one of the most daring covert operations of the decade? The world, stunned, watched Iran mourn and vowed retaliation. The assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was not merely the death of a man. It was a seismic tremor at the heart of a global conflict over nuclear power, regional dominance, and clandestine warfare. For decades, the scientist had embodied Tehran's most sensitive ambitions, the pursuit of nuclear capability, whether for energy or weaponry, depending on whom one believed. To Israel, Fakhrizadeh was the mastermind of an existential threat, the architect of a weapon that could alter the balance of survival. To Iran, he was a patriot, a man who had devoted his life to defending the nation against encirclement by foreign powers. The attack instantly escalated tensions in a Middle East already teetering on the edge of chaos. Israel's neighbors wondered if retaliation would ignite a war. Western capitals braced for Iranian revenge, fearing strikes against embassies, oil facilities, or naval assets in the Persian Gulf. Meanwhile, diplomats whispered that this was more than a single targeted killing. It was a message, a demonstration of reach and precision, warning Tehran that no fortress was impenetrable, no official untouchable. The stakes were immense. A single assassination threatened to derail ongoing negotiations, destabilize fragile alliances, and entangle superpowers in a shadow conflict. With each passing hour, speculation deepened. Who orchestrated the operation, and how had they penetrated the layers of secrecy surrounding Iran's most protected scientist? The answer promised to reshape the intelligence wars of the 21st century. Who had the motive to eliminate Mohsen Fakhrizadeh at that precise moment? Was it Israel's Mossad, continuing a decades-long campaign of sabotage against Iran's nuclear ambitions? Was it the United States, eager to leave a final mark on the region before a change in administration? Or perhaps it was an intricate collaboration of intelligence services, bound together by shared fears of what Iran might achieve under Fakhrizadeh's guidance. Why was he targeted in such a dramatic and technologically advanced fashion, in broad daylight, on a public road? Was the satellite-controlled gun a deliberate flourish to demonstrate capability, or a necessity dictated by the circumstances of surveillance? What message was hidden in the method? Why then? Was the strike intended to derail fragile diplomatic efforts between Tehran and Washington? Was it to weaken Iran's position before renewed negotiations on sanctions? Or was it timed for internal Iranian politics, destabilizing factions and undermining confidence in the state's ability to protect its own elites? These questions did not merely belong to intelligence agencies or governments. They echoed in every newsroom, every embassy, and every military command post around the globe. The mystery had begun. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh Mossad was born on the first day of winter in 1958 in the small city of Qom, one of Iran's spiritual capitals. The city's narrow streets echoed with the prayers of seminarians and the chants of political preachers, a place where religion and politics were intertwined from the very air one breathed. His childhood was shaped by this atmosphere of devotion, discipline, and simmering defiance against the monarchy of the Shah. Unlike many of his peers who dreamed of commerce or clerical life, Fakhrizadeh displayed an early fascination with science, tinkering with radios, mechanical toys, and crude experiments that hinted at a restless and precise mind. His family lived modestly yet with dignity. His father was a devout man who instilled values of loyalty, secrecy, and sacrifice. His mother, equally pious, emphasized humility and education. Together, they shaped a boy who listened more than he spoke, who observed details others overlooked, and who carried an intensity beneath his quiet exterior. Teachers remembered him as serious, disciplined, and exceptionally bright in mathematics and physics. His notebooks were filled with meticulous calculations, while his demeanor set him apart from classmates prone to laughter and distraction. By the time he entered adolescence, Iran was in turmoil. The 1970s brought rising dissent against the Shah's regime, with Qom as a center of clerical resistance. Fakhrizadeh, though still a teenager, absorbed the language of struggle, the idea that science and faith could serve not just personal ambition, but the survival of a nation. When the revolution erupted in 1979, he was a young man already immersed in university studies of physics. A quiet figure swept into the current of history. The Iran-Iraq War soon followed, a brutal conflict that demanded every citizen's contribution. Fakhrizadeh never served as a soldier in the trenches, but his academic gifts found another purpose. He was drawn into research programs that blended defense with scientific inquiry, a pathway that would define his life. By the war's end, he was no longer just a student of physics. He was on a trajectory toward the highest circles of Iran's most secretive programs, a man whose name would be whispered by foreign intelligence services for decades to come. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was not a man of flamboyant gestures or fiery speeches. Those who knew him described a reserved presence, a figure who blended into a crowd rather than dominated it. Yet beneath that quiet exterior lay an unyielding conviction shaped by revolution, war, and the survivalist ethos of the Islamic Republic. He believed that Iran's destiny depended on self-reliance, particularly in fields where foreign powers sought to impose restrictions. Nuclear science, advanced weaponry, and strategic deterrence were not luxuries in his view. They were necessities to preserve sovereignty. His ideological compass aligned with the core of the Islamic Republic's worldview, that the West, especially the United States and Israel, sought not only to contain Iran, but to eradicate its independence. In private, colleagues recalled, Fakhrizadeh would caution that concessions to foreign powers only invited deeper humiliation. His scientific rigor was matched by an almost religious devotion to secrecy, a belief that silence was the greatest weapon against enemies probing for weakness. Beyond ideology, Fakhrizadeh carried peculiar habits that reflected his disciplined mind. He was known to keep exhaustive notes in coded shorthand, ensuring even his personal reflections were indecipherable without context. He avoided casual photographs, rarely attended public gatherings, and often traveled under layers of security detail. He was said to enjoy poetry, particularly classical Persian verses that blended beauty with melancholy. Yet he never indulged in the intellectual flamboyance many Iranian academics embraced. His colleagues nicknamed him a shadow professor, because although he lectured at Imam Hussein University, his presence was ghost-like, always there, but never fully accessible. To his family he was gentle and withdrawn, yet even they were shielded from the full scope of his work. Within Iran, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh carried several nicknames that revealed both reverence and fear. To his students he was simply Professor Mohsen, a quiet academic who expected diligence but offered little warmth. To Iranian military officials, he was the father of the nuclear program, a title both celebratory and protective, acknowledging his foundational role in advancing sensitive research. To foreign intelligence agencies, however, he was the Iranian Oppenheimer, the shadowy figure believed to be engineering the country's path toward nuclear weapons capability. His name appeared in Western intelligence files, with the kind of prominence usually reserved for generals or ministers. Fakhrizadeh's self-image was never that of a celebrity scientist. He preferred anonymity, cultivating the aura of a man hidden in plain sight. Colleagues observed that he never boasted of his accomplishments, but neither did he deny his importance. In rare conversations, he framed his role not as a pursuit of prestige, but as a duty to ensure Iran could never be coerced into submission by technologically superior enemies. He saw himself as a guardian, a man chosen by history to carry the burden of secrecy, strategy, and sacrifice. To him, invisibility was the highest form of power. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was the crucible in which Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's path shifted from academia to the clandestine world of state power. At 21, he had been a budding physicist, immersed in equations and laboratory experiments. But the collapse of the Shah's regime and the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini changed the trajectory of countless lives. For Fakhrizadeh, science and politics fused into a singular mission: the survival of the Islamic Republic. During the Iran-Iraq War, his technical expertise was recognized by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, which increasingly relied on scientists to support the defense of the nation. Fakhrizadeh was recruited into programs that blurred the boundary between civilian research and military application. His calculations were not abstract. They were directed toward strengthening Iran's defenses against chemical weapons, ballistic missiles, and, ultimately, the possibility of nuclear deterrence. Within the military-academic sphere, his reputation grew quietly but decisively. He became a trusted figure for those within the IRGC who believed Iran must pursue capabilities that could offset Iraq's arsenal and deter foreign intervention. This early collaboration with the IRGC marked his transition from a scientist working in theoretical research to one deeply embedded in Iran's security apparatus. He gained access to networks of military funding, secured laboratories shielded from public scrutiny, and worked with teams sworn to secrecy. By the mid-1980s, Fakhrizadeh had crossed the threshold into a life where science served the state, where experiments were shaped not by curiosity alone, but by geopolitical survival. He was no longer just an academic, he was becoming a strategist in the shadows. The story of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh cannot be separated from the larger storms that defined the Middle East in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. His life's work unfolded against a backdrop of wars, revolutions, and rivalries that transformed the region into one of the most volatile arenas on Earth. At the heart of this conflict lay Iran's revolution in 1979, a seismic event that overthrew the Shah and replaced monarchy with an Islamic republic determined to resist Western domination. That defiance instantly placed Iran at odds with the United States, Israel, and much of the Arab world. The Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 forged Iran's survivalist mentality. Facing chemical bombardments, foreign-backed enemies, and international isolation, Tehran concluded that technological parity was essential. This lesson burned into the psyche of leaders and scientists alike, convincing them that only self-sufficiency and advanced weaponry could guarantee security. Out of this crucible emerged projects that merged academic research with military objectives, programs that drew scrutiny from global intelligence agencies. At the same time, Israel viewed Iran's growing capabilities as an existential threat. The Jewish state, already haunted by the memory of the Holocaust and encircled by hostile powers, regarded any Iranian pursuit of nuclear technology as a path toward annihilation. This perception hardened over decades, fueling covert sabotage, cyber operations, and targeted assassinations. Meanwhile, Sunni Arab monarchies such as Saudi Arabia feared Iran's revolutionary ideology and its growing influence in Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. Thus, a sectarian dimension layered atop the geopolitical struggle. By the dawn of the 21st century, the Middle East had become a chessboard where Iran, Israel, the United States, and regional rivals clashed in open wars and shadow campaigns. Fakhrizadeh's role as a scientist became inseparable from this larger battle. He embodied Tehran's determination to develop a deterrent in a region where deterrence often meant survival. His assassination decades later was not simply the elimination of an individual. It was an attempt to shift the balance in an enduring conflict that shaped the destinies of nations. Every major power in the Middle East and beyond held a distinct position regarding Iran's nuclear trajectory and Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's work. To Tehran, Fakhrizadeh was not only a scientist, but also a national shield. Iranian officials consistently declared that their nuclear program was for peaceful purposes, emphasizing medical research and energy development. Yet behind the rhetoric lay a determination to keep every option available. The state invested heavily in security for figures like Fakhrizadeh, signaling how vital it considered his contributions. Israel, in contrast, viewed him as the architect of a potential existential threat. For Israeli leaders, the very idea of Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon was unacceptable. Successive prime ministers, from Ariel Sharon to Benjamin Netanyahu, framed Fakhrizadeh as a hidden menace. Netanyahu even named him publicly in a 2018 presentation, citing captured Iranian files that portrayed him as central to Project Ahmad, a suspected weapons program. This move transformed Fakhrizadeh from a shadowy figure into a declared target. The United States' stance oscillated with administrations. While Washington often pursued diplomacy, especially during the Obama-era nuclear deal, there remained deep suspicion toward Iran's intentions. American intelligence officials consistently tracked Fakhrizadeh, labeling him a figure of concern. Under the Trump administration, hostility peaked, culminating in the withdrawal from the nuclear agreement and renewed sanctions. His assassination occurred during this tense chapter, raising questions of tacit or direct U.S. involvement. Other nations also played roles in the equation. European states such as France, Germany, and the United Kingdom supported diplomatic solutions, but shared unease about Iran's secrecy. Gulf Arab monarchies, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, quietly supported efforts to weaken Iran's capabilities, seeing them as threats to their regional dominance. Meanwhile, Russia and China positioned themselves as Tehran's protectors, opposing Western pressure and offering limited cooperation in energy and defense. Thus, Fakhrizadeh's life symbolized more than individual brilliance. He became a point of convergence, where the fears, ambitions, and rivalries of nations collided. His work was not confined to laboratories, but existed in the diplomatic corridors, war rooms, and intelligence dossiers of every power engaged in the Middle East. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh mattered because he embodied the fusion of science, secrecy, and state ambition, at a moment when Iran's future depended on all three. Unlike many Iranian academics, he did not confine himself to publishing research or teaching in universities. Instead, he operated within the most classified programs of the Islamic Republic, bridging the worlds of academia, military planning, and strategic deterrence. His presence was not symbolic but functional. He designed structures, organized teams, and oversaw laboratories that were hidden from international inspectors. Foreign intelligence agencies recognized him as the critical node in Iran's nuclear effort. Documents seized by Israeli operatives in 2018 identified him as the leader of Project Ahmad, the codename for research allegedly directed toward nuclear weapon design. Western intelligence reports suggested that while the program was later restructured, Fakhrizadeh remained at the helm, preserving knowledge, personnel, and infrastructure in dispersed institutions. His expertise allowed continuity, despite diplomatic agreements, sanctions, and international monitoring. Without him, progress would stall. With him, it could advance in secrecy. Inside Iran, he was revered as a strategist capable of turning vulnerability into resilience. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps trusted him not only for his technical mastery, but also for his discretion. He was the scientist who could not be replaced easily, for he carried both the intellectual blueprint and the institutional memory of decades-long projects. To remove him was to cut the thread binding Iran's nuclear narrative together. His importance also transcended technical work. Fakhrizadeh symbolized Iran's defiance of external pressure. His survival, even in obscurity, represented the endurance of Iranian sovereignty. Conversely, his death would be interpreted as a breach of that sovereignty, a humiliation demonstrating that foreign adversaries could strike even at the heart of Tehran's most protected circles. Thus, when bullets pierced his car on that November afternoon, the world understood it was not simply a targeted killing. It was the deliberate removal of a keystone figure whose existence shaped negotiations, strategies, and fears. Fakhrizadeh mattered because his life and his death redefined the limits of espionage and state power in the 21st century. Although Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was never a street militant or a figure of fiery agitation, his scientific path became inseparable from activities the international community increasingly defined as criminal. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, as Iran sought to rebuild after the devastating war with Iraq, Fakhrizadeh and his colleagues became subjects of surveillance by Western intelligence services. They were accused of clandestine procurement efforts, secretly purchasing sensitive equipment and materials that could support nuclear research far beyond civilian applications. Foreign governments alleged that he oversaw networks of front companies designed to mask acquisitions of laboratory technology, specialized metals, and computing systems. Customs agencies in Europe occasionally intercepted suspicious shipments linked indirectly to his teams, fueling suspicions that Iran's nuclear program was not limited to medical isotopes or energy production. While Tehran dismissed these accusations as politically motivated, intelligence files in Washington, Tel Aviv, and London began to thicken with his name. In 2007, the United Nations Security Council listed Fakhrizadeh under sanctions, describing him as a senior scientist tied to suspected weapons development. He did not appear in public to defend himself, nor did Iran allow him to be interviewed by international inspectors. His refusal became part of the mythology, the man who could not be questioned, whose silence was itself an act of defiance. Western officials saw this as an admission of guilt. Inside Iran, it elevated his aura as a scientist under siege, targeted not for wrongdoing but for his refusal to bow before foreign interrogators. Thus, even without direct arrests or courtroom trials, Fakhrizadeh became defined by accusation and pursuit. He was painted as both fugitive and guardian, a man whose scientific path was now inseparable from the geopolitics of crime and punishment. Unlike many revolutionaries of his generation, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh never endured years in prison or direct torture under the Shah. His fate differed. His confinement was not in cells, but within the walls of secrecy, surveillance, and sanctions. Yet stories circulated within Tehran's academic military circles that several of his close associates had been detained abroad during procurement missions. Some were questioned harshly, others accused of espionage, and a few recounted experiences of intimidation and psychological pressure in foreign interrogation rooms. Fakhrizadeh himself remained beyond the grasp of foreign courts, but the threat was constant. Iranian state media portrayed these episodes as part of a larger campaign of harassment, an effort to break the morale of scientists advancing national independence. Within this narrative, Fakhrizadeh became a symbol of resistance. His life was framed as a form of captivity without bars, unable to travel freely, living under constant security detail, shadowed by foreign intelligence agencies that hunted him relentlessly. The suggestion of prison, whether real or metaphorical, shaped his image. To his supporters, he was a man who bore chains invisibly, enduring the silent torture of isolation, secrecy, and perpetual threat. That enduring burden defined his resolve. As the Iran-Iraq War dragged into its later years, the Islamic Republic realized that survival required not only soldiers at the front, but also scientists behind laboratory doors. Fakhrizadeh's growing expertise positioned him perfectly for integration into structures that combined research with strategy. By the mid-1980s, he became affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' scientific branches, entities that were still embryonic, but destined to become central in shaping Iran's deterrence policies. Through these channels, Fakhrizadeh played a pivotal role in developing specialized research teams. He oversaw groups that examined nuclear physics applications beyond civilian energy, coordinating with military units that required advances in missile guidance and warhead design. In time, he emerged as the head of Project Ahmad, the secret program Western intelligence later exposed as Iran's most organized attempt at exploring weaponization pathways. Although Tehran consistently denied that such a program existed, foreign intelligence services treated Fakhrizadeh as the founder and architect. His affiliations were not confined to a single institution. He held senior positions at Imam Hossein University, a hub for the Revolutionary Guard's scientific talent, and later directed research within the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research, Espionage. These entities allowed him to recruit young scientists under strict secrecy, building a network loyal not only to the Republic but also to him personally. By the early 1990s, Fakhrizadeh was no longer a lone physicist. He had become the nucleus around which Iran's most sensitive scientific military projects revolved. His role in forming and leading these groups elevated him from a background figure to a man at the center of Iran's clandestine struggle for technological parity, a target whose influence grew with each passing year. As Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's prominence increased, the web surrounding him expanded beyond laboratories and universities. Iran's clandestine apparatus, particularly through the IRGC, grew more aggressive in sustaining its strategic programs. Smuggling networks became lifelines, ferrying sensitive materials through covert procurement channels in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Fakhrizadeh was believed to be a guiding mind behind these efforts, approving acquisitions and ensuring scientific projects remained supplied despite sanctions. Intelligence files later described shipments of advanced measuring instruments, vacuum pumps, and high-strength alloys, all routed through layers of front companies. Parallel to smuggling came darker accusations. Western intelligence agencies claimed that Iran, in defending its programs, resorted to kidnapping defectors or intimidating scientists suspected of betrayal. Though Fakhrizadeh was never personally linked to direct violence, his leadership within the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research placed him at the helm of structures accused of protecting secrets by any means necessary. Former officials alleged that mysterious disappearances and sudden deaths of defectors abroad were indirectly tied to Iranian operations, protecting figures like Fakhrizadeh. Within the regional theater, killings also entered the equation. By the mid-2000s, as Israel accelerated its campaign to sabotage Iran's nuclear program, Tehran retaliated by targeting perceived collaborators. Fakhrizadeh's work was seen as justification for such measures, giving rise to a cycle of covert strikes and counterstrikes. His name became synonymous not just with hidden laboratories, but with the shadow wars surrounding them. He represented the scientific brain whose survival justified entire networks of smuggling, intimidation, and bloodshed. Thus, the escalation was not only technical, it was human, geopolitical, and violent, a clandestine conflict with Fakhrizadeh as both symbol and center. The early 2000s marked a turning point when incidents tied to Fakhrizadeh's orbit began surfacing in intelligence reports with remarkable regularity. In 2002, an Iranian opposition group revealed secret nuclear facilities at Natanz and Iraq, sparking international alarm. Though Fakhrizadeh's name was absent from official disclosures, Western agencies soon linked him to oversight of research connected to those sites. By 2003, United Nations inspectors demanded interviews with him directly, a request Tehran flatly refused. His elusiveness deepened the mystery. The scientist whose absence spoke louder than presence. In 2004, a German intelligence dossier alleged that Iranian procurement networks tied to Fakhrizadeh attempted to acquire dual-use technologies, including centrifuge components. Customs authorities in Europe intercepted shipments bound for Tehran, fueling claims of covert enrichment projects. Then, in 2007, the United Nations formally sanctioned him, identifying him as central to weaponization studies under Project Ahmad. This designation placed him in the crosshairs of global scrutiny. By 2010, assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists began unfolding on the streets of Tehran. Majid Shahryari and Masoud Ali Mohammadi were killed by magnetic bombs attached to their cars. Another, Faridun Abbasi, barely survived. Each incident raised the question, was Fakhrizadeh next? He remained under tight protection, surviving successive waves of covert war. In 2018, Israeli operatives seized a vast archive of Iranian nuclear documents from a Tehran warehouse. Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly displayed slides bearing Fakhrizadeh's name, declaring him the undisputed leader of weaponization research. That moment sealed his fate. He was no longer a ghost in intelligence files but a declared adversary in the open. Step by step, incident by incident, Fakhrizadeh's world narrowed toward inevitability, each revelation tightening the circle around him. By the late 2000s, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's name had ascended from whispered intelligence reports into the highest tiers of global watch lists. His inclusion in the United Nations Security Council sanctions of 2007 was the first formal acknowledgement that the international community saw him not as a mere academic, but as a central figure in nuclear weaponization efforts. Unlike other sanctioned individuals, Fakhrizadeh never gave interviews, never defended his reputation, and never appeared in photographs released to the press. This cultivated aura of invisibility only heightened the intrigue surrounding him. Western intelligence agencies gradually elevated him to one of the most wanted scientists in the world. The United States Department of Treasury blacklisted him, freezing any assets tied to international networks linked in his name. Israel's Mossad described him in internal files as a walking national security threat, warning that his survival guaranteed continuity of Iranian nuclear ambitions. Analysts in London, Paris, and Berlin echoed the sentiment, "Remove Fakhrizadeh, and Iran's nuclear program would falter. Protect him, and it would thrive." Iran, aware of these assessments, elevated his security measures to levels usually reserved for ministers of state. Convoys of guards escorted him on routine journeys. His residences were monitored with tight surveillance, and he traveled sparingly. Yet these measures, paradoxically, confirmed his importance. Tehran's very efforts to shield him revealed to foreign adversaries how essential he was. By the 2010s, Fakhrizadeh's name was a fixture on counter-proliferation lists across agencies worldwide. Unlike militants or generals, he was not accused of planting bombs or firing weapons. His crime, as alleged by adversaries, was intellectual, the possession of knowledge and organizational power that could alter the nuclear balance of the Middle East. In the shadow war of intelligence, that alone was enough to make him a marked man. For years before his death, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh lived under the constant shadow of assassination attempts. As early as 2009, intelligence sources suggested that Mossad had identified him as the priority target within Iran's nuclear establishment. Protective convoys and counter-surveillance units became routine, yet the danger was never fully contained. In 2010, when Tehran witnessed a string of targeted killings of nuclear scientists, his name topped speculation lists. Each blast on city streets seemed like a rehearsal for the inevitable strike against him. The most direct attempt reportedly occurred in 2009, when Iranian authorities claimed to have foiled a plan to bomb a gathering of defense officials in which Fakhrizadeh was expected to attend. Though details remained scarce, Tehran announced arrests, linking the alleged conspirators to foreign intelligence. Later, in 2013, rumors spread that an Israeli unit had attempted to strike his convoy outside Tehran, a claim never confirmed but repeated in Iranian media as proof of ongoing threats. Even beyond Iran's borders, Western analysts believed that covert efforts to isolate and pressure him were underway. Intelligence briefings mentioned plots involving poison, staged accidents, or drone strikes, though most remained in the realm of speculation. Fakhrizadeh himself adjusted his routines, limiting public appearances, altering travel schedules at the last moment, and moving under heavier protection than most generals. His life was one of perpetual vigilance. Every failed attempt only underscored the perception of inevitability. Colleagues spoke of a man resigned to his fate, aware that he was the prime target in a covert war he could not escape. To his adversaries, each survival was a temporary setback. To Iran, each survival reinforced his myth as the untouchable scientist, a man preserved by providence until history decided otherwise. By the late 2010s, it became clear to observers on all sides that Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's survival was only temporary. His name had been exposed in seized documents, broadcast on international television, and openly cited by Israel's prime minister as the core of Iran's nuclear ambitions. In the world of espionage, such visibility was often the prelude to elimination. He had ceased to be a ghost in the shadows and had become a symbol. Symbols rarely live long in the clandestine struggle of nations. Iran's protective measures grew more elaborate. Multiple vehicles and convoys, decoy routes, and armed guards. Yet these layers of security betrayed the truth that he was living on borrowed time. His colleagues whispered that he carried himself with quiet fatalism, acknowledging that his knowledge made him both indispensable and doomed. Each assassination of his peers in Tehran served as a grim rehearsal for his own. Intelligence services abroad watched and waited, sharpening plans, refining methods, and waiting for the right convergence of opportunity and timing. For them, the question was never whether Fakhrizadeh would be struck, but when. His fate was etched long before the bullets tore through his car. The inevitability was chillingly clear. In the weeks leading up to November 27, 2020, foreign operatives began quietly entering Iran under layers of false identities. Some posed as businessmen, others as technical consultants, each carrying forged passports that had passed undetected through European and Middle Eastern airports. Intelligence reports later suggested the network had been assembled months in advance, with key agents arriving in staggered intervals to avoid suspicion. Each arrival was a piece of a mosaic, one that would only reveal its deadly image when complete. Flights from Istanbul, Baku, and Dubai provided the primary entry points. Surveillance teams blended into Tehran's busy streets, renting apartments under false names, studying traffic flows, and mapping the routines of Fakhrizadeh's heavily guarded convoy. Logistics specialists prepared caches of weapons, communications equipment, and the mysterious remote-operated machine gun that would later dominate headlines. Every detail, from the placement of cameras to the timing of satellite relays, was rehearsed in secret. These operatives worked in silence, avoiding direct contact with one another, communicating only through encrypted channels. Each cell knew only fragments of the plan, ensuring that compromise of one would not unravel the whole. Like shadows moving across Tehran's sprawling districts, they left no trace. By the time Fakhrizadeh's final journey approached, the operatives were already in place, waiting patiently for the order that would transform months of preparation into a single, decisive strike. Once inside Iran, the operatives needed proximity, not distance. They checked into modest hotels across Tehran and its outskirts, places frequented by domestic travelers rather than foreigners. Some posed as traders from the Caspian region, others as engineers attached to construction projects. Their rooms became command posts disguised as ordinary lodgings. Suitcases carried not clothing, but disassembled electronics, signal boosters, and miniature surveillance cameras. From these bases, they began tracking Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's patterns. Teams observed the scientist convoy from discreet vantage points, overpasses, cafes, roadside shops. They noted the number of guards, the vehicle rotation, and the exact minutes when his sedan slowed along the highway toward Absard. Each day of surveillance refined the choreography of the coming attack. One operative recorded traffic density along the Damavan road. Another calculated how sunlight affected visibility during different hours. Even the habits of local shopkeepers were catalogued to predict potential witnesses. Iran's counterintelligence services scanned for foreign operatives relentlessly, yet the team's movements remained invisible. By rotating hotels, paying only in cash, and using Iranian intermediaries for supplies, they dissolved into the background of city life. Surveillance logs were uploaded through hidden channels, relayed via satellite uplinks far beyond Iranian borders. Piece by piece, the net closed tighter around Fakhrizadeh. What seemed to him routine, a guarded drive to a countryside villa, was, to his hunters, a rehearsed opportunity. The stage had been set, and the audience remained oblivious. The morning of November 27, 2020, began as unremarkable for Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. He departed Tehran with his wife beside him, escorted by a convoy of armed guards. Their destination was Absard, a quiet town northeast of the capital, where he maintained a villa retreat. The autumn air was crisp, the road alive with weekend travelers. To the untrained eye, it was a scene of normalcy. Yet hidden eyes tracked his every movement. The convoy rolled along the Damavand highway. Traffic flowed predictably, slowing near certain bends and widening at stretches where Fakhrizadeh's car could be isolated. Surveillance drones, disguised as commercial equipment, hovered at high altitude, feeding live images to remote handlers. At ground level, operatives had already placed the crucial tool of assassination. A pickup truck parked unobtrusively at a roadside, carrying beneath its tarpaulin a mounted machine gun linked to satellite communication systems. At 2:15 p.m., the convoy approached the point of ambush. Fakhrizadeh's sedan, a black Nissan, was identifiable by its position in the middle of the formation. The lead security vehicle passed without issue. Then, as his car aligned with the parked truck, a sudden burst of gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the windshield, striking the scientist with surgical precision. His guards reacted instantly, returning fire toward what appeared an ambush team, only to discover no human assailant at the scene. The gun itself operated remotely, controlled from hundreds of kilometers away. Its precision aided by artificial intelligence designed to minimize collateral damage. Chaos engulfed the road. Explosions followed as the pickup detonated, leaving smoldering wreckage to cover the true method of attack. Witnesses later described a deafening sequence of blasts and gunfire, a surreal encounter where the attackers remained invisible. Within moments, Fakhrizadeh's vehicle ground to a halt. Gravely wounded, he was pulled from the car by his wife and bodyguards, but the bleeding was catastrophic. The operation, rehearsed for months, had lasted less than 60 seconds. The convoy's defenses had been bypassed not by brute force but by technological ingenuity. On that cold November afternoon, the father of Iran's nuclear program lay dying on a quiet roadside, the victim of an assassination designed to rewrite the rules of covert warfare. The operation that ended Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's life was unlike previous assassinations in Tehran, which had relied on motorcycle gunmen or magnetic bombs. This strike employed an array of techniques and tools that pushed the boundaries of covert warfare. Central to the plan was the remote-controlled machine gun, a Belgian-made FN mag mounted on a pickup truck. It was equipped with advanced optics, stabilized firing mechanisms, and artificial intelligence software that allowed for precision targeting, even as the convoy moved at speed. The weapon was not operated locally. Reports indicated it was guided via satellite uplink, controlled from an undisclosed location far beyond Iranian borders. Facial recognition systems ensured accuracy, preventing accidental hits on Fakhrizadeh's wife, who sat inches away. To obscure the method, the truck was packed with explosives, designed to detonate after the strike and eliminate forensic evidence. Yet fragments later recovered hinted at its sophistication, including specialized camera housings and communication components. Beyond weaponry, the tools of the operation extended to logistics. Decoy vehicles, encrypted communication lines, and disguised safe houses allowed operatives to avoid Iranian detection. Some analysts later suggested that the system had been smuggled into Iran piece by piece, assembled covertly within days of the operation. The integration of surveillance drones, satellite relays, and remote targeting created a strike that required no on-site attackers, nullifying the risks of capture. This fusion of technology and espionage represented a new era of targeted killing, one where assassinations could be conducted with surgical precision from afar, blending robotics, cyber capabilities, and intelligence tradecraft into a seamless act of lethal efficiency. Fakhrizadeh's death was not only a removal of a man, but also a demonstration of the future of assassination itself. In the hours before the ambush, tension rippled through the hidden channels of those orchestrating the strike. Every variable mattered: weather, traffic, satellite signal clarity. A single disruption could collapse months of preparation. For a moment, clouds threatened to obscure the uplink, forcing operatives to consider aborting. Yet the signal held. On the ground, Fakhrizadeh's convoy slowed briefly near a busy intersection, almost halting the plan. Had local police intervened or diverted the traffic, the assassination might have been postponed indefinitely. Witnesses later recalled an uncanny stillness moments before the shooting began, as if the air itself had tightened in anticipation. Security vehicles adjusted their spacing, creating a fleeting window in which Fakhrizadeh's sedan was exposed. It was the precise second for which operatives had waited, a moment balanced on the edge of success and disaster. For the hunters, each second carried the weight of exposure. Discovery by Iranian counterintelligence would have meant capture, interrogation, and diplomatic catastrophe. Yet, as the convoy approached the fatal stretch of road, the plan unfolded with eerie precision. The suspense broke in a sudden eruption of firepower, transforming calculated silence into chaos. The invisible hand of assassination had struck, unseen yet absolute. When the gunfire ceased, silence descended upon the road outside Absard, broken only by the cries of panicked bystanders and the urgent shouts of bodyguards. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh lay slumped in his seat, blood soaking his clothes, his breathing shallow. His wife, unscathed but trembling, tried desperately to hold him upright as guards rushed forward. They pulled him from the vehicle, placing him on the ground, where medics attempted resuscitation. The precision of the strike had been merciless. The bullets had torn into his torso, rupturing arteries beyond repair. Within minutes, emergency vehicles arrived, sirens piercing the quiet countryside. He was rushed toward a nearby hospital, but the effort was futile. The convoy, designed to protect him, now escorted a dying man. At 3:30 p.m., state media confirmed his death. Tehran's officials framed it as martyrdom, the ultimate sacrifice in defense of the nation's independence. For his adversaries, it was the successful conclusion of a meticulously planned operation. For Iran, it was a profound humiliation. The nation's most protected scientist had been struck in daylight, on Iranian soil, by enemies who never revealed their faces. His death was more than an ending. It was a message written in blood and silence. The discovery of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's mortally wounded body reverberated through Iran with the force of a national earthquake. News broke within hours of the ambush, first whispered across local networks, then broadcast by state television in solemn tones. The announcement was blunt. The father of the nuclear program had been assassinated. Images soon followed. His black Nissan sedan riddled with bullet holes, shattered glass carpeting the road, smoke curling from the charred remains of the decoy truck used in the attack. Crowds gathered at the site, some in stunned silence, others chanting in anger. Security forces cordoned off the area, combing the wreckage for clues. The sheer brazenness of the strike left even hardened officials shaken. How could such an operation unfold in broad daylight, within sight of bodyguards and under the shield of one of the country's most extensive security apparatuses? In Tehran, senior commanders convened emergency meetings. The supreme leader called for revenge. Iranian media framed the event as martyrdom at the hands of Zionist agents, while whispers spread of American complicity. To the public, however, the most pressing image remained seared into memory. A brilliant scientist bleeding on a roadside, betrayed not by his brilliance, but by the invisibility of his enemies. When Fakhrizadeh's body arrived at the Tehran medical examiner's office, the urgency of science met the weight of national grief. Forensic specialists worked under armed guard, aware that every detail of their findings would feed the narrative of assassination. The autopsy revealed multiple gunshot wounds to the torso, with bullets entering at sharp, precise angles. Trauma surgeons concluded that the damage to vital arteries and organs had been instantaneous and catastrophic, leaving little chance of survival, even if advanced facilities had been available at the scene. Fragments recovered from his body confirmed the use of high-caliber ammunition consistent with a mounted machine gun. Investigators noted the absence of typical residue from close-range fire, supporting the claim that the shots had been delivered remotely without human shooters present. The wounds bore the signature of controlled targeting, guided by optics and artificial assistance rather than chaotic small arms fire. The medical report, though clinical, was presented to the Iranian public as proof of foreign sophistication. Officials emphasized that Fakhrizadeh had been struck with surgical precision, a victim of not just violence, but technological warfare. His body became both evidence and symbol. The autopsy confirmed not randomness, but orchestration, a message written into flesh by unseen adversaries. In the days following the assassination, Iranian investigators scoured every available feed of closed-circuit television along the Damavand road. Yet what they uncovered was more disturbing than reassuring. Cameras that should have captured the moments before the strike were inexplicably disabled or had suffered mysterious malfunctions. Others revealed fragments of suspicious vehicles entering and leaving the area days prior to the attack, their license plates later discovered to be fakes. It was as if the landscape itself had been edited, leaving only shadows where evidence should have stood. Parallel to these discoveries came revelations about forged passports. Iranian officials announced that several foreign operatives, later identified through intelligence leaks, had entered the country using European documents of startling authenticity. Names linked to Austria, Cyprus, and Belgium surfaced, echoing the infamous passport scandals tied to earlier Mossad operations in Dubai and Cyprus. The precision of the forgeries suggested not simple criminals, but state-sponsored actors with access to advanced printing technologies and intelligence databases. This convergence of doctored surveillance and fraudulent identities deepened the humiliation. Iranian authorities were forced to acknowledge that the strike had not been a sudden act of terror, but a carefully orchestrated infiltration. The scandal suggested operatives had walked through airports, rented vehicles, and lodged in hotels under false identities without triggering alarms. To Tehran's security establishment, the implication was chilling. Their adversaries had not merely penetrated defenses, but had manipulated the infrastructure meant to protect them. The passport revelations and CCTV anomalies transformed the assassination from a singular act of violence into a broader indictment of Iran's vulnerabilities, In the face of global intelligence warfare, the killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh sent shockwaves far beyond Iran's borders. In Tehran, officials immediately accused Israel of orchestrating the strike while hinting at American complicity. The Supreme Leader called for definitive punishment, and the Revolutionary Guard promised retaliation. Public funerals transformed into political rallies, with crowds chanting for vengeance against the Zionist enemy. For the Islamic Republic, the assassination was not only a personal tragedy, but also a national humiliation, striking at the core of its scientific and military pride. Internationally, reactions were swift but cautious. European governments, fearful that the killing would derail fragile negotiations to revive the nuclear deal, urged restraint. Washington, still under the outgoing Trump administration, offered no official comment, though analysts suggested tacit support. Israel maintained its traditional silence, neither confirming nor denying involvement, though Prime Minister Netanyahu's earlier statements made suspicion inevitable. The fallout extended to diplomacy. Iran suspended cooperation with certain international monitoring protocols, warning that it could accelerate enrichment as a response. Regional powers braced for escalation, fearing missile strikes or covert reprisals across the Middle East. Oil markets trembled at the prospect of renewed instability in the Persian Gulf. The assassination also sharpened the divide between global powers. Russia and China condemned the strike, framing it as a destabilizing act of aggression. Western capitals quietly debated whether the operation was a tactical success or a strategic blunder, given its potential to inflame tensions. In the end, the global reaction revealed the assassination's dual purpose. It eliminated a man central to Iran's nuclear program while simultaneously sending a message that no figure, however protected, was beyond reach. Yet it also deepened the uncertainty of a region already teetering between negotiation and war. To understand the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, one must examine the intelligence agency most frequently linked to the operation: Israel's Mossad. Established in 1949, Mossad quickly became one of the world's most formidable intelligence services, tasked with foreign intelligence collection, counterterrorism, and covert operations. Unlike Israel's domestic security service, Shin Bet, or its military intelligence branch, Amen Mossad specialized in global reach. Its operatives operated under deep cover, often in hostile territories, and were trained to conduct surveillance, sabotage, and targeted killings with precision. From its earliest years, Mossad carried a reputation for boldness. In 1960, it captured Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi war criminal, from Buenos Aires and smuggled him to Israel for trial. In 1972, after the Munich massacre of Israeli athletes, Mossad launched Operation Wrath of God, assassinating individuals linked to Black September across Europe and the Middle East. Over time, the agency's name became synonymous with ruthlessness and efficiency. By the 2000s, Mossad had shifted focus toward Iran, viewing Tehran's nuclear ambitions as the gravest existential threat to Israel. Covert operations became central policy. Cyber attacks, sabotage at enrichment facilities, and the assassinations of nuclear scientists inside Tehran. In this shadow war, Fakhrizadeh emerged as the ultimate target. To Mossad, he represented not merely a scientist, but the keystone of a program designed to erase Israel's security margin. His death would be both tactical elimination and symbolic warning. Within Mossad, certain elite units are trained specifically for operations such as the killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Chief among them is Kidon, a covert unit whose very name means bayonet in Hebrew. Kidon is believed to consist of small cells of operatives, each rigorously trained in disguise, close-quarter assassination, and advanced surveillance. Members are drawn from Israel's most capable soldiers and intelligence officers, selected for their ability to operate invisibly in hostile environments. Parallel to Kidon, technological support often comes from Unit 8200, Israel's elite signals intelligence corps. This unit specializes in cyber operations, satellite coordination, and communications interception. In the Fakhrizadeh case, Unit 8200's expertise was likely central in enabling remote targeting systems and maintaining encrypted links to the weapon on the ground. Together, these units form a symbiotic partnership. Kidon provides the human precision, while Unit 8200 supplies the technological backbone. Although Israel never confirms the existence or operations of these units, their fingerprints have appeared across decades of covert missions. In the death of Fakhrizadeh, the use of a remote-controlled machine gun linked by satellite suggested the convergence of human tradecraft and advanced cyber capabilities, hallmarks of Mossad's most elite branches. Mossad's reputation has been forged through a long history of audacious and controversial missions. In 1960, the capture of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina demonstrated its global reach and cemented its mythos. In 1973, however, during Operation Spring of Youth in Beirut, its agents eliminated high-ranking members of the Palestine Liberation Organization, but not without international scrutiny. The agency's record has been punctuated by successes that reshaped geopolitics and failures that revealed its vulnerabilities. One notorious failure occurred in 1997, when operatives attempted to assassinate Hamas leader Khaled Mashal in Jordan using poison. The mission collapsed when agents were caught, forcing Israel to provide the antidote to save his life, a humiliating diplomatic setback. Yet in 2010, Mossad returned to form during the assassination of Mahmoud al-Mabhouh, a Hamas commander, in Dubai. That mission, though successful, exposed the agency when international investigators uncovered a network of forged European passports, linking the killing directly to Israeli operatives. These precedents set the stage for the Fakhrizadeh operation. Mossad had both the experience in eliminating high-value targets and the willingness to endure diplomatic fallout. The operation bore the hallmarks of its past: meticulous planning, technological innovation, and an unwavering pursuit of perceived existential threats. The decision to eliminate Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was shaped not only by intelligence assessments, but also by political leadership. For Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, halting Iran's nuclear progress was both a national security imperative and a cornerstone of his political identity. Publicly naming Fakhrizadeh in 2018 underscored his resolve. Within Mossad, Director Yossi Cohen reportedly championed aggressive covert operations, framing them as preemptive defense rather than escalation. Together, political and intelligence leaders pursued the strike not simply as strategy, but as a demonstration of will, signaling that Israel would act decisively against threats others preferred to negotiate. On November 30, 2020, Tehran staged the funeral of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh with all the solemnity reserved for national heroes. His coffin, draped in the Iranian flag, was carried through Imam Hossein University, the institution where he had lectured in obscurity but commanded quiet reverence. High-ranking officials, Revolutionary Guard commanders, and clerics gathered, delivering speeches that blended grief with fury. Portraits of Fakhrizadeh lined the streets, while mourners chanted vows of revenge against Israel and the United States. The ceremony was broadcast live, framed as both a farewell and a political declaration. The supreme leader issued a statement calling Fakhrizadeh a martyr in the defense of science and sovereignty, urging his protégés to continue his work. His family appeared in public, cloaked in mourning but resolute, symbolizing sacrifice for the nation's survival. For ordinary Iranians, the funeral revealed a paradox. A man largely unknown in life had now become a symbol in death. Few had seen his face before the assassination. Now his image loomed across banners, murals, and state media broadcasts. In that moment, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh ceased to be a secretive scientist. He was transformed into a national icon, his death repurposed into a rallying cry. In the months after Fakhrizadeh's death, Iran's nuclear policy hardened. Officials vowed that his work would continue, accelerating uranium enrichment as both defiance and tribute. His protégés were elevated into leadership positions, ensuring continuity of the projects he had overseen. The assassination, intended to cripple Iran's capabilities, paradoxically galvanized the program, fueling determination to prove that no single death could halt national ambition. Internationally, his killing cast a long shadow over diplomacy. Efforts to revive the nuclear deal faced new mistrust, with Tehran demanding guarantees that such strikes would not be tolerated again. In Israel, the operation was hailed as a triumph of intelligence, yet analysts warned it risked entrenching Iran's resolve rather than dismantling its progress. Within Iran's political landscape, Fakhrizadeh's death deepened factional divides. Hardliners pointed to the assassination as evidence that negotiation with the West was futile, while moderates struggled to defend diplomacy amid public anger. The vacuum left by his absence became more than scientific. It became political, shaping debates over Iran's path forward. Thus, the long-term consequences of his killing extended beyond one man. They reshaped policy, hardened positions, and ensured that the shadow of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh would linger long after his burial. In the end, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh's death changed little in the grand scheme of geopolitics. Iran's nuclear ambitions endured, Israel's vigilance remained unbroken, and the cycle of suspicion deepened. Yet his assassination illuminated a hidden world, where science becomes weapon, where borders mean little to assassins, and where governments sanction killings cloaked in silence. Fakhrizadeh's fate was sealed not by what he built, but by what he symbolized, the convergence of fear and ambition in an unforgiving arena. What his story revealed was stark. Truth in espionage is seldom uncovered, for it remains buried in the shadows.